Well, I want to do the masking of these parrots now. So I'm cutting out some masking paper, which should be low tack and should stick on. And I've just tried one type without trying it on a drawing first, and it took away the surface of the paper completely. It wouldn't come off properly, so I wasn't at all happy with that purchase. I've got some old stuff here that seems to come off more easily, so I'm going to try this. And I should be able to peel this off onto here and then cut around it, and later I'll be able to peel off the outside pieces and later the inside pieces when I've painted completely over it. Let's see if that works. It should still come away fairly easily, whereas the previous one that I just brought, which I won't mention the name of, but it didn't, and it tore away the paper surface, which is totally not what I need. So now what I've got to do is take my craft knife or scalpel, just go through this, cutting through the film, just through into the paper, if I do it correctly. And that should allow me to lift the film off right up to the cut, or it should. We'll see in a moment, won't we? And of course in the evening I should be able to do the same. So hopefully this bit of tape that I've cut here will come away now. That's it. Yes, it is there, good. So that seems to be working alright, good. Okay, so I'll cut around the rest now. And yes, it comes away there, okay, and down. Take off the whole of that. Lift off that, there. That's leaving that covered in the cellophane now. Make sure it's stuck well down below the blisters to let the water liquid into the underneath. All of that is covered. The other one was a light blue, which is quite useful because you could see where you've gone. But it was just so tacky it wasn't possible to get it off afterwards. Hopefully this one will be. Right, well let's remove the outside of the masks so we can just paint straight over that lot, I hope, and I'll peel up afterwards for the detail. Full experiment, but it should work. When we were there, for the time we had, nice and bright, nice and clear. This was the sponge rollers again, and using slabs of paint very loosely. I know that some of you wanted to do the sea, so you can see that very loose way of working. So what we're doing there is, if we start loose, we can finish tight. You can't start tight and go loose, it's impossible. So I start fairly loose within a fairly tight drawing. You can see how tight that drawing is there. The drawing foundation needs to be fairly good, because I find, especially if you're a beginner, it's much harder to work with in a loose or bad drawing and go loose, because you enhance all the bad things and it just goes awful. So you're better to try and get the drawing, even the basics of the drawing, fairly good. So let's go on to these mixed mediums. I've got these lovely sets of Unison Colour Pastels. Is it new? Look, not a mark on it. My new apron from Unison. And I do also have some of the more fluorescent colours. Now Unisons are wonderful, but they don't do the very bright garish pinks and oranges, but Jackson's do, so they're well aware of the fact that I would like them to do that. The only way I can get the bright colours is either to use the inscribes, the cheap ones, which are, they come in little boxes and they're very inexpensive. They're these little ones, you've seen these before, yeah? But they're okay for the end, but you can't really mix them with water because they are harder. Those nice bright ones, they're as soft as the Unisons, so if you need those bright garish colours for flowers especially, they're very useful. How did this come about using acrylic inks? Because when I used to be an artist in residence at Burton Agnes Hall, I couldn't get the brilliance and vibrance I really wanted of the flowers. Watercolour just wouldn't quite go there. So I started underpainting with acrylic inks, which are very, very bright and vibrant, and then going over and cutting in and going around with the pastels. So if we take an example of that way back from then, but it's under the light to see it better. That's acrylic inks, very, very loosely wet into wet, and then building up with the pastels. This is the same. This was a demonstration, well, this was a little day lesson with somebody in France in my little cottager there. But you can see the acrylic inks with all the reds going on here back, and then gradually picking things out. As a difference to that, quite different, although I'm painting wet into wet with the inks, that's just a pure watercolour. So just wetting wet with watercolour, the feel is quite different. You're not quite getting that same vibrance going on. And that then is another one of the cottager, but this time the inks in the background, see all these oranges. We don't want to lose the inks completely. The idea of the inks is to show through. So we don't do the inks and then lose it all in the same way as we don't lose all of the sponge background with the cafe seeds. We want those colours to come through. This one was a few weeks back. I did this at the same size as this one here. That's a demo for British Art Society a few weeks ago. This was a whole load of delphiniums. Now I have fun putting fantasy pictures together. A lot of my cafe scenes and these sorts of scenes, that's a composite of about 9 pictures that I wanted and put it together on the computer. Why are we limited by what's just there? You would move it if you were doing it as a studio painting, so I can do it much more quickly on the computer and move things around. If I'm doing cafe scenes, I can move the thing, I can put an extra figure in and so on. And most of these, most figures were put into that. They weren't there in somebody else's photograph. I either used my own or I recomposed them. So that gives you an idea on using different methods. Now, we're going to go on to this. I'm using FW acrylic inks. And one of the things with FW acrylic inks, and I did put some newspaper down, I think we're going to be all right, is that once they're on, like any acrylic, you've had it. You can't get them off again. And once they dry, you can't move them either, unlike watercolour, which you can lift or move or sponge away. So I've got to keep this painting going damp. I've got to use a spray. And the softer I want it, and the more I want no hard edges, and the more I want just wet and wet lovely effects, the more I'm going to need to spray. Now you can even do this on canvas. So if you wanted to do a watercolour effect on canvas, you can use the acrylic inks on canvas. And you can use water on that canvas, and you can spray them, and you can spread them, and you can do wet into wet, and you can marble and all sorts of things. And then paint acrylics over the top, or oils over the top. We forget that we can paint oils over acrylics, we can't paint acrylics over oils. Yeah? So, you know, you've got more versatility. I want to open your eyes, I want to open your minds to exploring and having fun and experimenting. And I'm going to get lost in this in a minute, because when I get going, you're there, but, you know, you can ask me questions if you need, but I just enjoy painting. So I'm taking a challenge here tonight. I've not done a demo like this in parrots in this way. There's a few new things I'm doing here that I haven't explained yet, which you're suddenly noticing things happening and saying, what's he doing there? So I'll bring that up as we go along, just to keep you occupied. We have to keep them wet, so we have to spray. Be careful how much spray, because you spray just lightly once and away from it, not too close, or you get trickles coming down. This is probably easier to do flat because there's nothing spreading out. But and I don't want things trickling down. I've got to be a bit more careful. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to go over with pastels anyway to touch it up. Doing this in New Zealand many years ago for a primary school, oh, that was a wonderful time. I had 6 months over there working North and South Island and demonstrating and exhibiting. And I played some folk instruments. I played the Overton and their anthem. I played that one, and they actually, the school sang it for me. I was almost in tears. It was incredible. I was playing with them, you know. But they were doing this demo for them, and I was doing a green cow amongst fields just to show how different colours could be used, you know, deep greens and darks and no blacks. And I hadn't realised that as I was spraying, I'd oversprayed, and I was busy nattering away and laughing. I thought, what are they all giggling about? I looked round and the cow was sliding down. It was not too wet, not too much. So you've got to be careful how much paint you put on. I'm going to start with a hake, and I'm going to work with an oval mop and go down to finer. And I guess, now what's your little, right, I guess you've all seen a rake brush, have you? Someone had it the other day and I was surprised, but rakes are these larger spaced ones, and you can get combs which are much finer. Now if you haven't got, it's a must for watercolours especially, because you can stipple with them, and you can make grasses with them, and for animals and so on, it's nice because you can just drag them to make feathers and fur, and so they're great for animals as well. Remember that we can use pastels with water, and that means that those very thin bits you couldn't quite get with the bigger pastels, you can often just get water on your brush and drag them out. Pastels are only, after all, the pigment with gum arabic, just the same as watercolour, except they're more coarse. So if they dry after that, then they're fixed. So my acrylic ink will be fixed, and it gives a slightly matter surface. I'm working on a £140 hot press here, and that's usually everything hot press is smooth. How can you do that? The bite of the paper isn't that texture. I usually work on the smoother side rather than the orange peel side. That's my choice. If you're using pan pastels, you're fine with the orange peel side. It doesn't matter because you're covering everything and blending it in. But for me, with the Unisons, I prefer to use a smoother side. And if I wanted to do a snow scene, for instance, if tonight I was doing Chinagraph pencil, watercolour and pastel, that makes wonderful snow scenes. And the Chinagraph pencil resists the watercolour and still shows through. And you can work the lights and darks up with the pastels at the end. And the watercolour gives up those lovely tones. But in this case, as I say, I'm going to be using the acrylic inks, and they will dry, and then I'll be able to work pastels over the top, and then I can work the pastels with water if I want to for finer details. And we'll finish with the parrots. So let's have a go at that. Good, I can actually get started. My sets of pastels, those are the 72 sets that I have chosen for my main use for all over the world. I also do an 18 set, which is the basic travel box. Now, as I say, a little bit of tonight is touch and go. I know what should happen in my head. I know what should happen logically, but if it doesn't, we'll see. Anything can go wrong, but it's part of the fun. Because, as I say, you cannot have an adventure without risk, can you? Because it's not an adventure. I want to wet the paper first, and I could use a bigger hake if I wanted. But, well, let's say now. Yeah, when it's dry then, the acrylic ink gives a key even on a smooth paper. I have stretched it for that obvious reason that I'm going to totally soak it. It's not totally necessary, and if you use a heavier paper, a 300 or whatever. And I was saying about texture, that if I wanted to do a snow scene and I was using watercolour and pastels, then I probably would have used a knot paper or something with a little bit of texture to help get the snow effects. You go with the surfaces. I tend to work normally from my mids to my darks in acrylics, and then from the mids to the lights. But in this case, it's the watercolour technique, so I'm going to be working from my lights to my darks right the way through, and I just want to get an effect of light and brilliance with this. And of course that will also depend upon the atmosphere in the room. I don't mean your mood about me, I mean the atmosphere of little water droplets in the air, because you well know that even in painting landscape in England we work from usually warm to cool in the background, except for sunsets and sunrises where it's warm in the background and cool in the foreground, so it's very different. Right, so I've got a basic coat on that. Now I shouldn't need that brush again, although I could use it to actually paint with. And I'm going to start with my lightest colours. And you can see what I've got here then, is standard watercolour technique I'm going to start with, and they're lovely luminous colours, these. Now I can go as dark as I like because I can put my dark colours in. So I'm just going to do some light colours at first here. A bit of orange and greens going on. I want to keep this wet, I mustn't let this get dry. So I've got to keep spraying. You see how lovely and luminous these colours are. So standard watercolour. And if you imagine when I was doing the big flower one for Brid, you know, these colours then, because I was really pushing the colours then, these colours really show out. And so don't worry if it's going to blend down. And so my light colours, as in watercolour first of all. Nice and loose, nice and bold, we haven't got to worry about the details yet. And acrylic ink is fairly transparent, so it does mean that I can actually still see my drawing underneath here. Not painted this one before, so there's no I think sometimes when I come into a workshop, I've got to make sure that I use the same plates and everything as the students, because they say I'm cheating otherwise. I've got more colours than they've got or something. And you've got some wonderful bright fluorescents in this, but I don't need them in this particular picture. But I shall use just a little bit of them, just for fun, just to show you. But I've got to keep this nice and... So I'm using it very thinly at the moment. I mustn't let these get dry, so I'm going to come back any moment and start to...
Peter, have you mixed the ink with water in the palette reservoir?
These are just straight inks in the palette.
Just ink
Yeah.
on the wet surface?
Direct inks, and all I'm doing is thinning them down as I go along. So if I wanted a very light pink, I wouldn't be adding white, because you're not with this, you're keeping it transparent like watercolour. I'll just be using it thinner, as I'm doing at the moment. I'm going to drop the heavier, stronger colours in just a minute. So, yeah, as long as I keep... So, I mean, that's just starting to dry. I don't want any hard edges. So what I've got to do is make sure that I keep this paper wet. And it's timing. It's like watercolour with controlled accident, you know. You've got to just touch it at the right time. Blending as well. And I'm doing it very, very thinly at the moment. But I'm going to get stronger as I go along. Now, I have had one or two awkward things with this already, because I was trying out a masking medium earlier on, and it's got a name like something erotic at the airport when you're searched, Frisket. And I tried a cheaper one, and it stuck to the paper, and some of this paper you'll find later is raising a bit because damp stuff wouldn't come off, and I tried two different ones first of all, and they would not come off, so you've got to be careful which one you get. The one I finished up with is the original Frisket, that's this one, and it's low tack, and that's what I was after. So if you're going to do this technique, or try it out, and it's very, very useful, especially if you don't want to do large areas of masking fluid or anything, then this is the stuff to use. Easy to just tack on and then cut out with a craft knife. I just want an effective light that I can work over, so I can cut into this. That's the beauty of pastels, because they are opaque after this. I can cut into this with the pastel and cut around shapes, or I can come over it and I can actually do the darks on top with all the lights on top. I'm totally free to do as I want that way. And it's like the jigsaw method I told you about when using acrylics. If you paint with this is my personal one for new students, my jigsaw method. It doesn't matter what you're painting, whether it's horses, dogs, seagulls, doesn't matter how complicated it is, figures. Once you've got that basic drawing done, it's the right shapes. So if we place in painting, like a jigsaw, the right shapes in the right places, with the right colours, relevant one to another. So we put the right colours in those right shapes, in those right places, relevant one to another, and those colours are relevant one to another. When the colour's on my brush, I want to use it wherever it is. So don't sort of keep cleaning your brush off and mixing and messing up your watercolours, and wherever it is, you want to use it. And that way, it's like a jigsaw. Every colour works out correctly one to another. And suddenly you find the painting just appears. You haven't got to worry about whether it is a horse. You've already painted a bit of the horse's leg because you put that bit in. It doesn't matter what it is, because if it's right where it is, it will turn out in the end. It's a lovely way to work. Things just happen. You've got to be bold, you've got to be brave to do it. You know, you can't sort of pussyfoot with this. But as long as you realise that you can't go far wrong, because you can go back over it. I've always got to make sure that I get enough done that you can see how it would finish, even if I don't manage to. So. I've been using it fairly thin. I'm going to gradually start to get stronger and stronger with it as the painting goes on. Just the same way as I'd paint a loose watercolour. Get the effect of light and then gradually tighten up. Again, you can see my being insistent about these marks, and I want the effect of palms here. I've got to make sure that those, although I can do it with the pastel later, it doesn't matter so much. And I can glaze with the inks as well, of course, which I'm doing now. I can put one colour over another. You see hard edges coming here, and it's just starting to dry out, so I've got to get up here and hit that. But I don't want it so wet that what I'm doing is just disappear. I'm all for mixed media. We shouldn't be always going by the book. You know, people say you have to do it this way. Or one of the reasons when I first started doing this very loose work was because I was having students coming to me saying, I need to loosen up, Pete. How can I do that? My watercolours have got so tight. And I get them doing this way of working with the acrylic inks wet in wet. And I don't let them think about the finished product. They've already got that in their mind. But if I keep them nice and loose as they're going along, and they don't realise how loose they are, they're not worrying about it, they're not worrying about those details. And about 2/3 of the way through, in 80% of the cases, I can say, well, just stand back now and look what you've got before we finished. Wow! Look at this lovely, almost semi-abstract, loose, wet into wet ink or whatever. We get too bogged down with a preconceived idea. Still working with my lighter colours and gradually coming into this. You can see that's a hard edge there. I don't mind that too much. I'm going to soften it in just a minute.
Have you masked any of it or not? Have
Have
you
to shout
masked
it.
any of it?
Sorry?
Have you masked any of it?
Ah, you see, this is what I was saying about the frisket. I was not going to say too much. I was going to wait until you noticed white areas appearing.
Oh, right, okay.
But these light areas are where I put that frisket, that film.
Right.
So when I get the whole painting done, and even the pastel on it, I can take those off and I can paint more tightly within that, not so loosely. So this is a totally new experiment.
Yeah.
We'd have a bit more of a job doing that with pastel paper, but it wouldn't really matter. We could use it and pastel over the top just to avoid smudging. But this works very well with this watercolour paper, you see. Yes, this is a new experiment today, trying it out on you guys. I'm using a turquoise now. Gradually building up these lights too. And I love these oval mops. It's Pro Art oval mop. You can get them in large, medium and small. This is actually a large one, but they're so lovely for watercolour because if I use them this way I can use them thinly, or if I want to use them more thickly I can just plod on like that. You don't have to copy every single mark that's there. I just want the effect of it. And I love working in different ways. The galleries are not too keen because they like to have you nailed down to a little box. You know, you paint as an impressionist, you paint in this way. And I mean, if you take artists like Picasso and so on, their styles change throughout their lives. And the reasons they were even painting, things that affected them. The only thing is, it's like the very textural ones I used to do. They aren't cheap, the acrylic inks. They're about £4 or £5 a jar, I think. But they do go quite a long way, and you can also draw with the lid, because the lids have an eyedropper in them, which is rather effective. So you can actually have the paper flat and be drawing with the eyedropper straight into your, or onto your paper, which is rather lovely, as I say. Working with a deep green now. And the reason I'm putting green over here is because I'm going to drop some warm into it. I want to get this effect of this pineapple-like crisscrossing on the texturing on here. I could use a rake brush for this now if I wanted to. I'm going to use the rake a little bit later, deliberately for you. It's a lovely way to work, isn't it? Being loose and free and easier for you on the flat, but equally, you know, it's quite fun this way. Again, let's keep it just wet enough, not too much as it's sliding down here. Just enjoy the effects. And we want to be using, as I was saying it earlier, but we want to use the best method and medium for the subject. So if I was doing a very stormy Scottish scene, then I might want to be using a limited palette of watercolour wet in wet. If I'm doing a very bright, vibrant picture of flowers like this, then these come in very handy. The roller and sponge rollers for the backgrounds of those lovely cafe scenes to get the soft effects of light and romantic mood. And the thing will gradually appear before your very eyes.
Which blue are you using now?
That one now is which blue? You know, you go to each different company and the same one is called a different name, isn't it? This is Rowney blue. To me it's almost like an ultramarine, but a bit stronger, sort of in between a Prussian. And I'm going to be using Prussian in just a moment. So it's I suppose, you know, a deep cobalt or an ultramarine is probably nearest in this. I'm going to go right down. And like any painting, if we put rough next to smooth, warm next to cool, light next to dark, we can enhance the things around it in the same way as we can with the opposites in the colour circle, the complementary colours. You see I'm gradually working darker now, putting the darks over the light, so warm next to cool, light next to dark, and rough next to smooth will help us enhance. And just one colour can make a difference, as Constable well knew, because if you look in his landscapes, I beg your pardon if I've said this before in my demos for you, but if you look in his landscapes, there's nearly always a little red figure somewhere, and we know why that is, because that red figure is the opposite in the colour circle to the green, so therefore it'll make the greens look brighter. And so that one little figure can totally change and make the other colour stronger. I don't use white and black until the very end if I need to at all, because you can't go whiter than white and you can't go blacker than black. So I tend to, on my cafe scenes, if you look, you'll notice that the last colours will be the black. And that'll because I've painted all my darks already with deep colours. I tend to use alizarin crimson or a burnt sienna or burnt umber with a Prussian blue or an ultramarine blue to really get the darks with a colour. And my lights, for instance, in water and surf will be very, very light colours, tints of colours. And I'll just add a bit of white at the very end for the last sparkle, and that will give me a lovely effect. This is Purple Lake now, or deep purple. It's a wonderful colour. You see I'm gradually working up the warms against the cools and from the light to the dark. So, you know, some people say, oh, I want to do watercolour, or I'm sure you watercolourists will enjoy this, because it's just the watercolour technique, isn't it? And we could be doing this with watercolour. I mean, when I first started off years ago, I was using watercolour before I went on to the inks. What are we doing? We've got 20 minutes left before break. I'm hoping to try and get this underpainting done so that I can start on the pastels immediately after or during your tea break, so we can really get the idea of brush skills. It's an important part of being able to use a brush, that we can draw with a brush as easily as we can with a pencil, as the Chinese and Japanese do, in fact, don't they? So now I've missed a red flower out there, so I know I can go back in with some of the red from this, but I can also go back in with the pastels later. I'm not going to worry about any of that. Any lights that I paint over by accident, I can go back and I can put them in with the pastels later. I can't lift out unless it's wet. If it's wet, I can lift out some of this colour, but I am stuck with what I put down. So, but I know, go back later with the with the pastels. Get this red going a bit more, a bit of orange into there maybe. Right, down to this Prussian blue now. I doubt whether I'm going to use black at all unless I use it with the pastels later, just to bring things out. I'm okay at the moment with this. So do we even need black? You see, it's quite vibrant with it, with these darker colours. It's fun, isn't it? And you can just so loosely just build up. But don't worry about all these little. Let the accidents happen and use the medium for the beauty that it has. I think I've gone about far enough with the background, yeah? So I'm just going to just have a little bit of wet just to make sure that it just... And I should be able to work into that now with the pastels, and then once I've done enough with the pastels, I'm going to come back and we'll have a go at the parrots. So have a cup of tea now and I'll let this dry. Right, you can see I can tint colours in. I can start my mid-tones and my lighter colours. I've just put two little bits of white there just to give you an idea. If I go into cream, there's a very light cream on there. Cream. So I can put light over dark now, and I can put dark over light, or whatever I prefer. Now you can imagine now if I was doing a flower scene, I can start cutting in with these lovely highlights and things, can't I? As you saw down there. And I'm going to use some brushwork with this as well in a minute. It's not just going to be this. It'll make more sense because this white is still here and it's affecting what I'm doing. So once I get rid of that white later, it'll make more sense. But I don't want to lose an underpainting. I'm just always going to let it glow through. There's no point in doing it otherwise. We want to keep that lovely vibrance and yet still be able to bring these colours over the top. Just soften that in. That's why I'm leaving the film on at the moment, because I don't want to go over the parrots yet. Just feeling one colour against another, because I can enhance them that way. So if I want to come down to these flowers, for instance, now I can come back in with some brighter reds. So for instance here, this flower, this one here, let's start to get some of these lovely oranges and reds going on. I can cut in, I can add across the top. can blend, and I can always use water as well to come back and drag them out. I'm going to do that with some darks in a moment just to show you how that will work. I can leave them alone. Remember that pastel works by reflecting light. I've got the thing on, haven't I? Yes. I've done it before now, I've done the whole film, nothing. When you smudge pastel, you kill it. That's one reason I don't use fixative, I use double mounts like these. If you paint this pastel with water, it is fixed. So it means you can do a whole underpainting with the pastel and water, and then put your pastel over the top. And you can get 2 or 3 coats over the top of a fixed one, that way. But it will be duller. And if you blend pastel, it kills it. So the idea with pastel, even the old English technique, is to block and blend and put all your undercoats, and then you put your final coats on and you don't touch them. Just the tiniest little bit of touching here and there maybe, because you'll kill them. And that sparkle is when the pastel is lovely and fresh. But as soon as I smudge or blend, it's going to kill it. You can grind the pastel and you can splatter pastel over it with water or whatever else. There's so many ways you can work, but to say, do start to explore. Don't be stuck in one way of working. Have fun. I usually have my pastels with the paper taken off. But if I have to do a film, then obviously I've got to have one box with the numbers on, so I can say I'm now using number so-and-so, so the Unison people can then see what I'm doing. So it's coming out as I sort of expected it to. As I say, I haven't done one quite like this before, so it's all good fun, and I'm totally, thoroughly enjoying it. But just make sure it looks like something in the end for you guys. But and putting that stronger yellow on is going to make the lighter yellow, the creams, seem lighter. So I've got to play one colour and one tone against another as I go on with this. It start to bring the sun, just starting on the sunshine now. I'm just starting to use much stronger, more vibrant colours, and I'm going to use some much darker ones yet too. So if you were doing watercolour, you would lift that out, wouldn't you? Just lift it out with a damp brush, but in this case I'm just going to put it over the top. If you've got a failed watercolour, then actually water and pastel can really pull it together again, if you're careful with it. If you've lost all your highlights or it's gone dead and you don't want to wash it off again, you can just use pastels with water to bring it out. That'll make more sense when I get the dark of the parrots in. It's a little bit like a fencing match when you're doing that's why I use long handled brushes, because if you're doing a fairly impressionist piece, especially at first like this, you've got to be able to keep getting back to see what you've done. It's no good. The other day at the workshop we found this. I mean, some of them were very disappointed as they were going along, because they were up here. When it's actually got back from them, you can see them. You've got to give yourself a chance. Now I have got a box of what they call the Midnight set, which is rather nice too. Unisons do a 9 box of all of the dark tones of a dark purple, a dark blue, a dark green. Very, very useful box to have, because they all are actual colours, they're not just charcoal black. So that's a box worth getting, those 9. But I've been treated like a library as well. People have come along, bought a painting one year, and then next year they come back and see another exhibition. Well, I'd like that one better. Can I swap them over?
That's good, isn't it?
This is good.
It's true. Blackmail on one of them. She bought 3 for her wall, then came to me saying, several weeks, I spent the money on going on holiday, She came back saying, well, could I change these please to other paintings? Well, what's the problem? They don't suit the wallpaper. I change the you can redecorate the house. And I said, well, okay, if you change them for ones of a parallel price, maybe, but it still didn't quite work out. Oh, people will try on. Right, now, let's take my life in my hands, and let's see if we can get this paper off. That's what we need to do, is share ideas all the time, that's right. So, if I want a little bit of splatter going on here, there's so many ways of splattering, but this way is quite good. It doesn't tend to put more on you than the... And I talked about the cone brush, but I'm going to use that in a minute, and the parrot. But that lovely cone brush, for instance, if I wanted I wanted a bit more texturing going on here. I can use that brush, a bit more water. Because the pastel is quite dry now, you see how that's going to be lovely little fine lines and things like that with the comb. And for hair on animals, for hair on hares, you can imagine what that can do with the smaller and larger ones, and the very fine ones, the combs, not the rakes, you can get wonderful. Or we can dot and dash with it. So for grasses and stuff, it's lovely, just to give you an idea. And I could then start doing that with the edge of the parrot's tail or wings, which I'm going to do with the pastel in just a moment. There we go.
Oh gosh, it's clear as it comes out now. I'll come across that. It's coming off like the cellophane, isn't it?
It's torn slightly just there, but that's no worry because I can soon touch it up. But that's where it's torn earlier, so I already know that had it happened. But there you are, you see that's the frisket. Quite useful, and you can probably see more uses for yourself now. Rather, if you want to use masking fluid, of course, and it's a huge area, well, and you can reuse it. I mean, you know, the pieces I cut off there earlier are all still here on the roll.
So how is it supplied?
Is it on a roll then?
Yeah.
Sort of like a
around
flat cellophane almost, it's sticky.
It comes on a roll like that with the backing, so you can peel it off the backing. You can either cut it out and then stick it straight on as a stencil from the whole thing, peel it off. But don't forget you're going in reverse then. I made that mistake earlier.
May I pass this around?
That's called frisket.
I think the gold was yet it was waste.
Now, as with watercolour, sometimes we can get a brighter colour by dropping one colour into another than we can by mixing them. So in this case, I'm not going to get a very bright red. What I can try and do to get that bright red is to go on with my my lighter colour first, and then drop in the red afterwards. So if I want to mix an orange, I can put the yellow first and drop the red into it, rather than try and mix it, which would kill it. If I take I'm dropping some magenta, some very light magenta, into this orange now, to really try and get the vibrance. You see how fresh that is? And I'm going to put some red into it in just a minute. I want one colour working against another here. Into that, the deeper red. Right, I know you're short on time now, so that's what I wanted to get to. You can now see how those plain colours will come out. All I've got to do at the end, when I've done all of that on this parrot, is go back in with the pastels and just bring out the highlights of the yellow and the darks. And for the dark here, for instance, I can put some pastel on it and use the brush to get the details around it, in the same way as I could use the rake brush even on here, just to get the feeling of the feathers going on across there. Yeah. Will that do you tonight then? Yes. Try to get it finished. I would like to go further, but you've got the basics. And what I'll do is I'll put this film up on YouTube later and send you the link, so you can see the actual picture finished. But tonight was just to show you that technique of fun.
Well, I'd like, on behalf of Driffield Art Club, to thank Peter. It's a very nice, exotic, hot, warm picture on a horrible, cold January day. And I don't do acrylics, but I can do this, and I'm sure a lot of you will be probably going away and experimenting with your backgrounds and salvaging pictures that you've done that you've not happy with, and going back into
with
them
the pastels.
with pastels.
Yeah. So you can use watercolour with the pastels as well, remember, so it's just the same, but
yes.
you make your watercolours much stronger when you paint them. If you don't use pastels over the top, that's the only thing.
Yeah. The pastels do emerge though. I do know what you mean about pictures. Don't get too rigid and just put it on, and then
Start
they just
loose,
suddenly come out.
finish tight, and keep that jigsaw method going on. Right colours, right shapes. It just appears, as you can see here.
Yeah, and one of your mottos is explore. So I'm going to
take risks.
Take risks. Yeah. So I'd like you all to
Well, I got this far with the one from Driffield Art Society the other day. pleased to get that far really. It's quite involved, and I got so carried away with it I wasn't really watching the time, because normally I would have gone on to these parts a bit further to show them how far it would go. So I just managed to get some of the colours in of the parrots, and that's what I'm going to carry on with now. I'm going to now do the rest of the parrots with the inks, and then just finish off with the pastels. I'm just finishing off now with some magenta, or the nearest I can get to magenta with Unisons, and that'll warm these worms up. Instead of doing warmer, we do the opposite to bring the opposite colour out. And that should just about do this picture, I think. Bit of luck there. Magenta coming into these blues, bring the blues out as well. I think that's just about there, you know. If we do it there, we might have to come down here and do it all as well. Already got the reds in there really, so not too bad. I think I'm going to call that finished, you know. A little bit higher up here maybe. There we go. Well, I'm going to call it finished at that.